Republican, I'm a conservative. But in order to heal from the damage caused that day, we need to call out the facts. It's time to stop the outrage and the conspiracies that fuel the violence and division in this country. And most importantly, we need to reject those that promote it. As a country, it's time to learn from our past mistakes, rebuild stronger so this never happens again, and then we can move onward. And serving on this committee, I'm here to investigate January 6th, not in spite of my membership in the Republican Party, but because of it. Not to win a political fight, but to learn the facts and defend our democracy. Here's what we know. Congress was not prepared on January 6th. We weren't prepared because we never imagined that this could happen. An attack by our own people, fostered and encouraged by those granted power through the very system they sought to overturn. That is a lesson. That is not a conspiracy theory or a counter-narrative. We don't blame victims. We go after the criminals. Some have concocted a counter-narrative to discredit this process on the grounds that we didn't launch a similar investigation into the urban riots and looting last summer. Mr. Chairman, I was called on to serve during the summer riots as an Air National Guardsman. I condemn those riots and the destruction of property that resulted. But not once did I ever feel that the future of self-governance was threatened like I did on January 6th. There is a difference between breaking the law and rejecting the rule of law, between a crime, even grave crimes, and a coup. As we begin our work today, I want to call this committee's attention to the oath of office, an oath not to a party, not to an individual, but to the Constitution that represents all Americans. Everyone in elected office knows how hard it can be sometimes to keep that oath, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States in the forefront of our minds, what with the political pressures and re-elections always around the corner. But Mr. Chairman, our witnesses today, like every law enforcement officer across the country, took the same oath we did. January 6th, the temptation to compromise their oaths didn't come in the form of a campaign check or a threat from leadership or an all-caps tweet. It came in the form of a violent mob. While we on this dais were whisked away from the danger, heroes like those here stood their post before it and paid the price. And we are only here now because you guys were here then. Therefore, it's altogether fitting that we begin our investigation of January's lawless attack against the Constitution with these four men who made sure that the attack did not succeed, with those who helped to ensure that democracy held. And I think it's important to remember that you are four with stories, but there are hundreds with stories as well that you represent where you sit. Officer Fanone, I know your passion is to make sure that DC Metro gets the credit it's due. And I thank you for I know that you represent the hundreds of officers like Officer Hodges that responded to that call. What I want to ask, does this feel like old history to any of the four of you? Sometimes I get, we hear out there, it's time to move on, right? It's been 6 whole months, time to move on. Does this feel like old history and time to move on? You can just say yes or no.
No, sir.
Nope.
There can be no moving on without accountability. There can be no healing until we make sure this can't happen again.
I echo that. How do you move on without correcting what happened?
Let me ask you all, one of the narratives out there, and Officer Fanone, it triggered something in your testimony when you said it. So there's been this idea that this was not an armed insurrection, and as if somehow that is justification for what happened. We know the hugs and kisses. We know it was BLM and Antifa, right? Of course, then you would, I'm sure, want to investigate that if that's the case. Now we've heard maybe the FBI actually started this, but one of the ones that has always held was that this was not an armed insurrection. Officer Dunn, you mentioned that those that stormed the Capitol were very well organized and trained. And let me ask you, and I'll ask actually to all four of you, And Officer Hodges, I know this was part of your job initially before you responded to the Capitol. If in the middle of all that melee, you see somebody with a gun in that crowd, would you be able to go out, apprehend, arrest them, read them their rights, and go through that process? Or was the mission at the moment survival and defense of the Capitol? So I'm asking, is it possible that people maybe had guns? And we've seen that actually there were. But this idea that, well, people weren't arrested with guns, at the time it was raw survival. I'll start with, we can just start on the left. Let me ask you, what's your response to that?
For those people who continue to downplay this violent attack on our democracy and our officers, I suggest them to look at the videos and the footage right now, because